league to an extent as well, and they provide a traditional club experience. But I don't think they bring. If you're replacing something new that's fallen out with, you need something new to marry that up to give that edge still. And I don't think I also don't think the people who are likely to go along there from a sponsorship point of view are the people who will attract high-end sponsors. Whereas you look at somewhere like London, Toulouse, they are places where you can start to get into bigger sponsorship markets. And you can bring in, if you've got a London element, you can bring in a much bigger deal, a brand that's more universal. I know brand, having worked in marketing, I know brands that won't do advertising outside of London.
Yeah.
So if you've got that, you're looking at a whole different ball game in terms of the commercial income you can bring in.
Yeah, certainly. There's lots of different, there's, I suppose, slightly more confidence in the longevity of what surrounds the clubs in the north, because even when those clubs have gone to the wall, they've come back very quickly and stuff. Another interesting development in the Toronto story is that Total RL reported that the backers behind the proposed New York franchise have entered talks to buy the Toronto Wolfpack. They revealed a consortium fronted by New York founder Ricky Wilby has been in discussions with Wolfpack officials about buying the troubled club. When contacted, Wilby said, "It's certainly something of interest, and we've spoken extensively with the Wolfpack management team. Subject to completing our due diligence, it would certainly be an avenue we'll be exploring and increasing our interest in. It's something both ourselves and the Wolfpack would like to conclude quickly." So does this mean the New York franchise is dead for now? Not dead yet, but potentially dead? Or does it mean that Toronto might become the Toronto-New York Wolfpack and kind of split time between the two areas, which might actually mean they can play more home games in... Well,
that's where I was
North
going,
America.
Is that it would open up those times where you can't play in Toronto. Could they be able to play in New York at that time? Probably, because it's that bit further south where it's a little bit more temperate. It'd still be bloody cold, but... It's
also the availability of facilities in Toronto. They don't have any deal where they can play anywhere at that time of the year, and Lamport, where they do have the deal to play, is not
has a dome over it, so you couldn't see inside it.
Or actually play rugby league in it at all. But I think it's used for frisbee tournaments and stuff like that. And like five-a-side underage soccer games and stuff. But yeah, the statement, or the kind of comment, I suppose, by Ricky Wilby doesn't really tell us much, does it? Other than that this is real, that there are conversations that are happening. So the people who are behind New York seem to have come to things with more of a plan. Whether we feel confident enough about the extent of the details we've seen about that plan, but they've come along with a clear brand vision, a clear sort of list of people that they have tentative agreements with, or more than tentative agreements with in some areas for that franchise when it comes in. So they put some long-term planning into building that before it's even coming to the competition. Maybe that means that these guys have a bit more of a long-term plan. Potentially that means that they'll come into it with a sports club that has sort of liquid assets to spend on players. Maybe it's a positive. Anyone who comes in has to learn from the mistakes that the Wolfpack have made to this point. But anyone who comes in, it would be ideally, if they are passionate about a rugby league project, would be certainly a benefit, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know what experience Ricky Wilby has in terms of that kind of running a business of that size and what kind of backing they've got behind them. But I think it's kind of a case of, if it means consolidating the two for the time being and having that sort of split New York, Toronto, I mean, that's quite exciting in itself. And that keeps both options alive. If it means we have to sacrifice having a separate New York team for the time being, then that's possible. I'd rather have one team there that was successful and able to bed in for a long term. You could have the New York stint and the Toronto stint. I mean, still with the amount of games we play, they'd still be getting a fair number of home games.
Yeah.
So I think it would be quite good. And then because you have it in certain patches of the year, you could kind of market to that, and you could do something to that. I think if you speak to the Toronto fans, I would imagine they'd rather something rather than nothing.
Yeah.
And I think it might be a case of, unfortunately, that's the casualty of Corona, is having them as two separate sides, and they have to be one together. I think I'm all for innovative solutions at this point, because I think we've got to keep Toronto in if there's any way to do it that doesn't compromise the integrity of the competition, and that respects that what they've done and the management they've had up to this point hasn't been the best. So if it is a case of a change of management and a merger as such, I know we don't like the word merger, but if a merger to make them the Toronto York or the new O or whatever, Wolf Apples, then I think it's worth a go, because I think that the flip side of that is worse, and I'd much rather. I think certainly if I think of like friends at work, I'd be able to have a conversation about that and how that's different and weird and interesting. I can't imagine anyone asking me about Lee.
Well, I have
heard
a proposal to reinstate a train station in Lee, so that's a bonus.
There we go then.
But I suppose whilst we're on the Wolfpack theme and talking about like who might take over the club and the fact that people who take over the club have to run it better, well, if they can come in with a better structure and plan and stuff like that, it might impress Super League more. And Toronto's Super League participation agreement has been terminated as a result of their withdrawal from the 2020 season. Total RL have reported today. The club's non-participation has resulted in Super League effectively kicking them out of their existing agreement, but apparently this is more a formality rather than a new development. It just means that Toronto will need to sort of formally renegotiate their terms and conditions with the Super League competition to be able to stay in it next year, which I think Toronto were looking to do anyway, if we're all honest, as well as the Super League wanted to do it. But
yeah.
They still hold an RFL agreement, so they can still be eligible to play in another RFL competition next year if things are jiggled around a different way, like we just talked about before, potentially another team going up into the Super League, for example, and a championship spot becoming open. But yeah, and all clubs must sign a sort of participation agreement with the league, so it's not a new thing that Toronto had to do that, and obviously Toronto have breached theirs, which is why it needs to be renegotiated. So the Wolfpack would have to enter into a new participation agreement before being able to play in the competition in 2021, is what the Super League statement sort of confirmed. So it's still all up in the air what's going to happen with Toronto. But if they don't apply for renegotiation, then that is that, effectively. But it sounds like they have applied by turning up last Thursday on a Zoom call and trying to convince them. I hope that David Argyle was more personable and engaging than he was on the interview he did with Sky Sports. That they showed some clips from the other day on the footage, because he was terrible, and avoiding all the questions with just one-word answers, which I'm not sure. It didn't fill me with any more confidence, but hopefully that's.
I think of the two of them, I think Bob Hunter is probably the one you want out fronting the media. Probably he's a bit more experienced in that sort of environment and a bit more measured, shall we say?
Yeah, certainly the guys, Scott and Henry from the Wolfpack pack, they've got a lot of confidence in Bob Hunter, and they thought Bob Hunter coming into the club was a sign that the club was taking things more seriously. So hopefully there can be something sorted out there. But that's the sort of Toronto wrap, I suppose. Let's move on to the other big story, I guess, the ins and outs around the Championship, League One, and the special competition.
Yeah, the celebratory competition Hokey Cokey continues, and Whitehaven have issued a statement from their board on Wednesday giving their support to the RFL's decision to cancel the remainder of the 2020 Championship and League One seasons. Haven were promoted into the second tier for 2020 and are now focusing on putting things in place for the 2021 season.
and the RFL have also announced this week the cancellation of this year's Academy Championship. The governing body has said it's written to all clubs who were scheduled to compete to inform them of the decision, which officials say has been reluctantly taken. The RFL says there remains considerable logistical challenges surrounding a return to training and them to playing matches. This has led to a reluctant acceptance that a resumption of the competition would not be practical. The statement adds that planning has already begun for the resumption of scholarship and academies in 2021. Which is going to be tied into the reserves as well, being cancelled next year already. So it's going to look a bit more like it used to look before the 3 months where it might have looked different this year.
Yeah, I think it's a sensible decision. I think it's just about making sure, and I think all clubs will be doing this, but I think it's making sure that the clubs are keeping in touch with the players as well as they can and just keeping them in the game and making sure that this doesn't mean a lost generation. I think this is a big worry from my point of view, is that these kids could just walk away, and I think they've got to keep them in touch. Hopefully a lot of them, they'll have their support of their amateur clubs as well, so they'll be able to be keeping them doing something and involved with the game somehow. But I think it's just a worry that there could be a generation of kids that were coming through the scholarship system and then disappear.
Yeah, I'm sure the clubs, especially at the top level, will be working hard to avoid that from happening. So, and staying in touch with the guys that were on deals or had signed some sort of terms at those levels anyway this year. And you don't, some of the people higher up in the academy level might be called into Super League action unexpectedly this year as well, with the change of the rules around what they need to be paid, so that can be facilitated a little bit, and also the lack of relegation might be a chance. People might see as a chance to play younger players towards the back end of the campaign, and also just necessity with 2 games a week for 4 or 5 weeks in the middle of this burst.
Yeah, I think we'll wait and see what happens and how. I think it's an opportunity, isn't it, with the attrition. I think there won't be many teams that won't need to call on their academy at some point, just even if it's for training and bench places. They'll get to a point where probably, I would imagine, as we're starting to get probably about October, when we're starting to get fans back in stadiums, hopefully it will be about the same time that we'll need as many people to bolster it. And I think that's, again, going back to Toronto, that was one of the problems, because they don't have that academy to fall back on or any sort of player pathway to bring people in. And it's what you were speaking about last week with the guys, because they haven't got that. They do suffer when it comes to that sort of injury crisis situation.
Yep.
Right, so on to the outside of things, and York, Widnes, Swinton, Oldham, Coventry and Workington have all joined the list of clubs who declined the invitation to play in the Super Duper Special Autumn competition organised by the RFL for Championship and League One clubs. Clubs cited the challenges of meeting COVID-19 biosecurity measures and making planning for 2021 a priority in their reasons for not taking a place in the tournament. So that's me as the microphone hung up for another year.
Yeah. How do you feel? Do you think it was kind of an inevitable call? I sort of was a little bit surprised, because I kind of thought, with the prize money on offer, and the fact that Coventry are one of those teams that share a facility, so it might be easier to cover some of the costs of making the facility available and that sort of stuff. And York fall into this category as well for me as well, and Swinton to an extent, but I don't know. I don't know how much the other teams play there now, but I sort of thought that could have been worked out for those guys. I think with Coventry, that actually that's also, as well as it's a good thing, it also presents issues in and of itself as well. So one of them will be that obviously the Rugby Union Club, which own the facility, will be trying to play matches in this period as well as they come back in for their season. Okay, yeah.
So it's right during their peak season, and they tend to play double headers on a match day. So they tend to play their B or academy fixture before they play their A fixture. So they take up a whole day of that. So you've got that issue. And I think one of the other issues is there's inconsistency in the guidance between rugby union and rugby league in